the ultimate thing to take away from the book is it's a study of two officers across a half century of existence in the U.S. Army, but it's really the qualities that exist within us all. And what's going to come out on top is, I didn't say this, someone else said, the qualities that you feed. That's what will come out on top.
Good day, everyone, and welcome to another episode of What's Really Happening, the podcast from the Global and National Security Institute at the University of South Florida. I'm Dr. Tad Schnaufer, the Strategy and Research Manager at GNSI. Joining me today, as always, on What's Really Happening is retired Marine Corps General Frank McKenzie. He's the Executive Director of GNSI and the former Commander of United States Central Command. In our last episode, we talked about a couple of great military novels, Starship Troopers and The Forever War. Today, we're going to continue with that fictional book theme. But this time, our focal point will be grounded in a very real-world situation. Once an Eagle was a #1 New York Times bestseller and is a favorite among military personnel. In fact, the book appears on the Commandant's required reading list in the United States Marine Corps and is frequently utilized in leadership classes at West Point. The book was written in 1968 by Anton Meyer, and we're looking forward to the discussion today on the leadership lessons we can pull from this tome. General, welcome back to What's Really Happening.
Tad, always good to be with you.
So let's get started. What's really happening with this wonderful book, Once an Eagle by Anton Meyer?
So Tad, the book that's on display here is, I believe, your book.
Yes, it is.
Actually, it's very well thumbed. You got it when you were a very young officer, I'm sure.
Yep.
There's a lot, I can look inside. I can see there's lots of notes, all kinds of stuff scribbled on it. And that's true of people that most copies of this book that are carried around by soldiers and Marines and airmen and sailors as well, too. It's a great book. Written by a guy named Anton Meyer, published in 1968. Anton Meyer was a Marine and went to war in the Pacific as a Marine, Harvard undergraduate. Remarkable writer, wrote some other books as well. But Once an Eagle stands as his opus and is still in print to this day, and really is probably the definitive treatment of what it means to be an officer in the U.S. Army. And for that reason, it's a treasured book to study leadership, to study the development of the Army. All kinds of lessons can be mined from Once an Eagle, but they have to be mined carefully.
Right, absolutely. You still need to think about it, and it's certainly a tome. There are endless lessons throughout the book. There's so many quotes, there's so many situations. You find the main character in Sam Damon, or some of the other characters, actually, same thing, to be able to take some of those lessons away. So, the beginning of the book, we're looking at the character getting trained up and going to World War I. What are some of the big themes you see through this beginning portion of the book?
Sure. So the book is about two people. It's about a guy named Sam Damon, who you're talking about, and it's a guy named Courtney Massingale. So let me just take a minute to describe them both. So Sam Damon is who we all want to be. He's an all-American kid from Kansas, wanted to go to West Point, couldn't wait, enlisted in the Army, and goes off to World War I as a private soldier. And really, over the next 40 years, rises through the ranks to become a general officer in the Second World War. He always does the right thing. He's brave. Personally brave, always tries to make the right decision, makes mistakes on occasion, but he's who we want to be. And so the story is told through his eyes largely, and that of his protagonist, his companion in this journey, a guy named Courtney Massingale. Well, Courtney Massingale goes to West Point. He's an elite track athlete at West Point. And whereas Sam Damon's a muddy boot soldier, Courtney Massingale is painted as a staff officer, always getting the good jobs, always close with general officers as a young officer, always greasing himself, to use an old Navy phrase, to advance up the chain of command. And their contacts and the times they come together in World War I, in the interwar years, in the Second World War, and then in a thinly veiled Vietnam, are the major stages for this conflict. And what we see exposed in the book nakedly is the good soldier, Damon, against the staff officer, climber, schemer, Machiavellian character, Courtney Massingale. And that leadership model, Tad, has affected generations of Army and Marine officers, particularly by its description of the way soldiers and Marines should behave. Again, people have modeled themselves on Sam Damon, and they've been taught to look out for Courtney Massingale. And that's an interesting approach, and it's a great novel and 800 pages of it. And it's worth reading, and I recommend it to everyone. But here's the danger, Tad,
right.
And the reason you should be careful when you read this book. Nobody's Sam Damon, and nobody's Courtney Massingale. And in fact, those characters exist within us all. There's some of Sam Damon in every soldier, and there's some of Courtney Massingale in every soldier and every Marine. And the way you balance the two is how you're going to be perceived as an officer. Everybody wants to be a muddy boots infantryman and excel at that and have enormous physical courage and receive the Congressional Medal of Honor. And of course, Damon, the character, earns the Medal of Honor in the First World War. Right. Whereas at some point in the book, they're careful to note that Massingale received no medals for courage in the First World War.
Right.
And not to say he was a coward, he just didn't receive any medals for courage. So you have the raw physical courage of Sam Damon contrasted to the cerebral brilliance of Courtney Massingale. And I would argue that's a false choice. And it's a dangerous choice. Certainly, you want to watch out for guys that are like Courtney Massingale, but there are not a lot of those, actually. The Army and the Marine Corps have a good way of finding those people and not allowing them to rise. In fact, you get people that have, again, qualities of Damon and qualities of Massingale. And that's really I think the ultimate thing to take away from the book is it's a study of two officers across a half century of existence in the U.S. Army, but it's really the qualities that exist within us all. And what's going to come out on top is, I didn't say this, someone else said, the qualities that you feed. That's what will come out on top.
Well, and Anton Meyer definitely sets the tone of this engagement between the two when he introduces the character of Courtney Massingale in World War I. So Sam Damon had just led a number of operations throughout World War I, like you said, or in the Medal of Honor. And it's about 300 pages in before you even get introduced to that antagonist. And I'll quote the term. So Sam Damon's unit has just got out. They're muddied. They're getting ready for another attack. And this car pulls up and this officer jumps out, and this is how they describe him from the book. Let's see, a tall man with a white, handsome face, a captain wearing an immaculate uniform with riding boots, carrying a swagger stick. So you kind of get this picture of someone who's been at the staff office all day while these guys are all muddied, covered in blood from their wounded. And the first soldier he talks to, just kind of dismisses them, and he tells them, you stand at attention when you talk to me, despite these guys being on the line for 72 hours taking incoming artillery. And it just sets the stage of Massingale as that regulation focused, discipline focused, but yet not actually being in a place where that discipline's tested.
Right. A great point. And that is the first contact between the two, and it sets the tone for everything that follows in the succeeding decades. You got Courtney Massingale, calm, handsome, detached, in command. Sam Damon fighting, rough, bloodied, and the contact between the two of them. But it's an important distinction because there's an important leadership lesson there. You don't fall down out of the sky and harass soldiers who are in the fight, and that's a great leadership lesson. But at the same time, it's just a little too pointed and a little too neatly drawn.
Yeah, if it only was so simple to don't be that guy.
It's never that simple. It's a good lesson. You don't want to be that guy. But remember, all of us have a little bit of him in us. Just all of us have a little bit of Sam Damon in us.
Well, in that situation, right? So he comments on the unit not having discipline, these type of things. Obviously, he wasn't with the unit during the engagement, but how do you draw the line? You obviously want some form of discipline, but it's hard to be able to do that nuanced approach as a leader. It's
the heart of being a leader is to do that nuanced approach. You have to understand what you're doing then, what the circumstances your unit is in, and what you need to rationally demand from them. Because look, soldiers and Marines will do what you ask them to do. They want to do that.
Right.
But there's a time and a place to ask them to be clean shaven, their shoes polished and ready to salute and snap and pop. Probably in the attack position is not that place.
Right.
Probably in the attack position, you're more concerned about, do they have the ammunition they need? Are their medicine kits packed? Do they have the water they need? Are they carrying their rations? Do they know the plan? And are we focused on what we want to do? Not really. Are your puttees properly rolled in the First World War?
Right, and there's also a concept of you don't need to be overly gung ho and frivolous with your personnel.
That's one of the greatest qualities of a leader is we're going to go in, we're going to fight. Some of us may not come back, but I'm going to have a plan that will get as many of us back as I can, and I'll be there with you. That's the kind of leader that people want to interact with. Of course, that's Sam Damon. That's the Sam Damon that exists throughout all 800 pages of the book.
Right, because we see some other possible officer types, and actually, there's a discussion about midway through the book where it's in World War I, where Damon's discussing with Colonel Caldwell, his commanding general, or commanding colonel, then general. You follow this character as well throughout the book, but he's talking about relieving an officer, and the colonel notes is that the problem with this officer he relieves is he has no fear, none at all. I will have no man in the boat who is not afraid of a whale. He has no right whatsoever to sacrifice good men in a crazy lust. If you cannot measure danger, how can you evade it? And for the officer in question, war is not a very serious business. And we see that kind of play out through the book, where you know there's heroics, there's leadership, but there's also recklessness.
Yeah, and one of Meyer's real accomplishments as a writer is he does introduce these subordinate characters, and we get to look at different leadership models. He's talking about a character early in the book, in the First World War, actually, who, as General Caldwell notes, wasn't scared. And it's a fool who's not scared when you're facing German artillery. And so that means you have to have a healthy respect for the danger that you're going in. Otherwise, you're going to let your men's lives slip through your hands. You can't do that. And so he's right. He was right to relieve him. That's a good. You don't see a lot of those characters in the U.S. Army or in the U.S. Marine Corps. Again, what you see are elements of that character, and that's the nuance I think you got to take away from the book is there's strong character archetypes that are presented in the book, and they're very good and it's beautifully written. But what you need to understand is it's far more nuanced than that, and maybe some of those characteristics are in us, and we have to guard against those characteristics.
Right, and it really gives as you read through the book, you see these little encapsulation, engagements of an officer here. They talk about certain qualities, and then you never necessarily hear about that officer again. But you take that learning point forward as you grow throughout the book, as you grow with the character Sam Damon in many ways. Right. And there's another one coming from Colonel then General Caldwell. He mentions to Damon. Again, towards the end of the First World War, he says, don't let your mind atrophy. Don't become self-righteous. It's an occupational disease for a soldier. It spawns arrogance, selfishness, and indifference. Don't let the weight of things numb you. Think, read, and disagree.
That's good advice. And for someone who's going to be in the military profession, it's important to read outside the narrow professional requirements of the job. And it's hard to do that because the professional requirements can be significant depending on what you're doing. You're tired at the end of the day, you want to do something else, but you have to force yourself to get outside because really soldiering and being a Marine is talking to human beings. And in order to talk to human beings and communicate to human beings, you need to understand the broad expanse of humanity. You're not going to get that from a narrow professional approach. You've got to be broader.
Well, and it's funny because in many ways, as you follow these characters and you follow Massengale, you see that he's kind of exactly what that is: self-righteous, arrogant,
very capable, very cerebral, brilliant thinker, but doesn't understand the human element of combat. And whereas Damon has an intuitive grasp of the human element of combat, he's also very smart. He's also a very good planner, but he understands the human dynamics that go into combat, how hard it is to get men to go forward into the night, into battle, into possible death. Massengale is not particularly worried about that. It's a map exercise for him.
Well, and it's funny because the author describes Massengale's voice. He notes in the book that when Massengale starts talking, Damon's describing this, that his voice lacked human vibrance. It felt metallic. It was like a field order translated to sound aloud. It had no flaws. Yeah. So you can almost hear this individual talking like they're reading from a field manual. And again, it lacks that human dimension.
Again, very descriptive, very apt. I would say there are qualities of that in all of us.
Yeah, well, and in some ways it might be easier. It's just easier to read an order or field manual instead of actually thinking of how you can be compelling, how you can actually connect with those who are serving under you.
You're absolutely right.
And again, it's played out many times throughout the book. So as we look later on in the book during more of the World War II phase and then later, what are some of the big key takeaways you see from Sam Damon here?
Now they're senior leaders. Damon's a division commander. Massengale is his corps commander. So now you're talking larger leadership issues. And here the clash really becomes naked between the two of them. It's the First World War carried into the Second in terms of their different views of warfare. You got Damon trying to fight his division, Massengale who's put it in unnecessary risk, Damon who has to stand up for his division. His best friend, the assistant division commander, is killed because of a Massengale order, Ben Chrysler, the ADC. So it's a very difficult situation for Sam Damon. But how he weathers that is very important. And at the end, he accepts, rather than turning Massengale in for a wrong decision, he accepts a presidential unit citation for the division, which is, I think, a pretty significant thing because it explores. Now you're in the gray area. Mm-hmm. It's not black and white, and it's one of, I think, Meyer's most sophisticated constructions in the entire book. You got a guy who wants to end Massengale's career and has the tools to do it because of the egregious mistake Massengale made in ordering a maneuver for the division that they weren't capable of, and a lot of other things behind that. But in order to get his soldiers, the surviving soldiers, a puck, which is a big deal, he's willing to overlook that conduct. Mm-hmm. And it's a little bit of Sam Damon suddenly having feet of clay. It humanizes him in a way that really wasn't clear before that, because there's nothing in it for Sam. Mm-hmm. He's doing it for his soldiers. But nonetheless, you can make a case it was important to get rid of Massengale before he could do it again. But instead, Damon accepts a compromise. There are not a lot of compromises in Once an Eagle. Mm-hmm. If there's a criticism of the book, it's a binary approach, and I've sort of laid that out. But here is really an excellent example of really what being a senior officer is like sometimes. You have to accept a less than perfect solution. And that's a very good description of that by Anton Meyer.
Well, and there's some other plays throughout World War II that these characters go through that kind of, again, delineate them, like everything from the name of the operation, right? And Massengale wants to use some sort of Greek name that's elaborate, Palladium, right? And Sam Damon's like, the troops aren't going to fight for that. They need an operation with a simple name that you can get behind.
Killer, Ripper, something like that. Everyone knows what it means.
Is there something in a name of an operation? Do you think it's right there?
We today do a terrible job of naming operations. Because we got to be so careful we don't offend anyone. Right. That could be changing now. We'll see. But typically they're chosen. The commander didn't get to choose them. As a CENTCOM commander, I couldn't choose my operations names. They were given to me by the Department of Defense.
Did you already have a couple just laid out?
I might have chosen different names.
You might have. Okay, fair enough. But going back to that dynamic of Sam Damon, and again, going for this presidential unit citation, or in a sense, torpedoing Massengale's career, you see the character of Sam Damon over time. You can see, the years of effort kind of wearing on him, and he's starting to have a little bit different thoughts. He's being more reflective, and you're in that high command. You're under high pressure, and you're really gone for a long time. You see that the book does a great job also talking about family life and trying to balance these things with a military career. Hard
to do. Particularly hard in the Second World War, where they were deployed for years, several years on end. And you're right, Anton Meyer draws that out beautifully in the book. The relationship between Damon and his wife. Damon is actually an adulterer in the book and has an affair with an Army nurse. So a lot of things are brought out in there that are sort of nuanced in the second half of the book.
Right, because you would think, that it would be all raw, military focus in a sense, if it's being recommended reading. But it does highlight some of the...
No, it's Meyer does a very good job of humanizing Damon, particularly in the second half of the book.
Yes, in a sense, after he's a little bit older, he's a little bit wiser, and he starts realizing it's a little different than just being that gung-ho infantry soldier. So as we wrap up with that piece of World War II, and they're coming into, and again, another peacetime. At this point, he's been in senior leadership. He's a general. What's that look like as he ends up not having to go to Korea? And what's that look like in the 50s as we start kind of...
So, you sort of, not a lot of discussion of that in the book. He's at the infantry school down in Georgia. So not a significant discussion of that. But where it really, in the book ends, of course, in Vietnam. It's a different country. He uses different country's name, but for our purposes, we can call it Vietnam, where Massengale is the commander. And Damon goes out to gather facts for the Army Chief of Staff. They clash again. Massengale has plans to expand the war into China. Damon has an opportunity to be with the Undersecretary of Defense and Massengale in a briefing where he stands up and says this is a foolhardy plan, and he had actually visited the formations, the Allied formations that would have fought the battle, in order to have the information at his fingertips to be convincing in this discussion. And he is convincing in the discussion, and he thwarts Massengale's plan to move into China and expand the war. So in that sense, it's sort of the culminating end of it. And of course, shortly afterwards in the book, Damon is killed in an attack, and it brings his life to an end. Massingale, we don't know what happens to Massingale. He's sort of left adrift. We don't know. But the final clash between the two of them, and remember, the book was written in 68. Mm-hmm. So Myra's making a point then about Vietnam. Mm-hmm. This is also a Vietnam book, a little bit. And he's talking just a little bit about the way it looked in 1968, 67, 68, when he wrote that chapter is pretty, I think, significant.
Yes, absolutely. And particularly, obviously the Tet Offensive probably had yet to happened in 68, so he probably didn't get that. But that really changed a lot of the public-facing view of the war on top of, even really drove a negative wedge in that. And it was, culminating point. But we'll also put a spoiler alert for the death of Sam Damon. So probably we need to make sure we put that in there. We're looking at our audio crew now. We'll put a big red letter or something on that. But so he does die at the end. And one of the points before he goes to Vietnam, so he's out of the military and he gets asked to come back.
Right.
And one of the interesting points there is he feels he's having this internal dialogue, and he's also talking with his wife, but he feels he's really one of the only people who can go. He's sold himself that he's almost like no one else could do it better than him type discussion.
Ted, I might disagree a little bit on that. I would say that he didn't feel that so much as he felt he had no right to say no if he was asked to go. And he talks about with his wife the fact that when one of these island battles, in fact, the battle that Courtney Massingale caused the destruction of his division, he fights a last-ditch action to save the division. His driver, a sergeant named Sergeant Brand, jumps on a grenade and protects Damon from dying. He certainly would have died had Brand not done that. And so when he's asked later on to come out of retirement to go to Vietnam, in effect, and do this mission, his wife's telling him not to go, and he tells her the story of Brand. He says, I think I owe effectively, he says, I think I owe that to Joe Brand to go if I'm called because of that. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here today. And so it saved my worthless life then. So I now should do what the Chief of Staff of the Army wants me to do at this time. And I think so that's the reason he goes. I don't think he felt he was the only guy that could do it, although he probably, with his background, was a very good choice to go do that mission. But I think he went because he's a soldier and he was asked to go do something by the Chief of Staff of the Army.
Well, yeah, and again, out of retirement, and he comes back in, and he does it. Yeah,
that's what you do. That's Sam Damon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, that's the character we get to learn.
We'd all like to be Sam Damon.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, it's difficult. Again, difficult decisions, and the book explores that at great lengths of that family dynamic of obviously his children and what they're doing throughout the different wars and how they accompany the lifestyle as well. But wrapping up, we've talked about the book, General. What is the big takeaways that you took away when you read this, and then also throughout your career? Is there anything you applied from it directly?
I use this book throughout my career. I've given it to a bunch of officers. I reread it frequently. I've got a copy that looks about like yours, Tad. Again, I go back to you need to watch the Courtney Massingale inside you, watch the Sam Damon inside you. Try to find a balance, because nobody's going to be Sam Damon and nobody is going to be Courtney Massingale. But you're going to be whichever you're going to be the kind of officer that you encourage. Right. And so you want to be more like Sam Damon. But the Army's not full of a choice the Marine Corps, between Sam Damon here and Courtney Massingale's here. So the lesson shouldn't be watch out for the Courtney Massingales. That's not the lesson at all. The lesson is you must look inwardly, and you must watch that inward fight inside yourself as you go throughout your career.
Right, it's a spectrum.
That's the lesson. It's a spectrum, and you're going to move up. And it's not a constant spectrum. It's going to change as you go, as circumstances change. But over the course of a long career, you have a lot of opportunity to reflect on those situations in that book. And that book has been very good to me for all of my career.
And one of the other points between the two characters is kind of division between a commander on the ground and then a staff officer. But if you're going to be an officer, you have to be able to do both in many ways.
You have to be able to be a good commander, and the Army needs good staff officers too, and the Marine Corps needs good staff officers too. They are not incompatible. And that's a wrong lesson that you could learn from this book. That's why you got to be careful when you read it. Without the staff, it won't work. And without commanders, it won't work. You need both, and you can be both. They are not exclusive.
Right. Yeah, because it definitely does not shine a good light on staff officers.
It does not.
So it makes it seem like that's not the way to go. But it's natural progression of a career.
We should recall that George C. Marshall was a staff officer in the First World War, and that's how he became ultimately to be Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army in the Second World War. But he was a staff officer in the First World War for the entire war.
Well, he still made it to the top and did great things for the nation. So obviously it's a real life example.
Absolutely.
The other side. Well, thank you so much, General, for discussing this amazing book with us today. And we look forward to our next conversation.
Thanks, Tad. Always a pleasure.
And that's going to wrap up this episode of What's Really Happening. We had an enlightening discussion with GNSI's Executive Director, retired Marine Corps General Frank McKenzie. We discussed the influential fictional military book, Once an Eagle. Anton Meyer's book explores a very real timeline from World War I, World War II, and the beginning of the Vietnam era, and encompasses a number of lessons learned for leadership and for tacticians. The chance to be able to see and understand this book through the eyes of an elite American military officer is a rare opportunity, and we surely enjoyed the discussion today. Thanks for spending some time with us. I'm Dr. Tad Schnaufer, inviting you to join us for our next episode when we find out what's really happening.